Hello, I'm Stacie Larson from the Maitland Public Library. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm coming to you today from my own kitchen instead of from our beautiful demonstration kitchen at the library because I'm cooking my own dinner tonight. Valentine's Day is coming and lots of people love going out for Valentine's Day to celebrate with their loved ones. Now, as much as my husband and I do enjoy dressing up and going out for a fancy dinner, we don't tend to go out for Valentine's Day because it's just too crowded. We like to stay home, plan a nice dinner at home, and so that's what I'm going to make for you today. But today I'm going to focus on a meal that sounds super fancy, but it's something you can completely do at home with the things that you already own. No fancy tools, no fancy techniques, all things you can probably manage right now today. So the menu for today, I'm going to make you a filet mignon with a red wine and shallot sauce, roasted garlic mashed potatoes, Haricot Verts with caramelized shallots, and for dessert, a strawberry shortcake. So I'm going to start with the most important part of any meal, and that's dessert. Here in Florida, we have this great advantage in that strawberries are a winter fruit. I always thought of them as a summer fruit coming from further north, and the very first time we came to visit here in Florida to find a place to live, our host gave us strawberries. And I thought, it's January, there are no strawberries. But there are strawberries here in Florida, and that is a beautiful thing. So strawberry shortcake, it's an easy dessert, but it sounds fancy. It was not something I ever had as a kid, other than, the doll that you could sniff her head. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to make. And it's the kind of dessert you do want to make ahead. You can prepare the strawberries the night before. You can do them in the morning before you go to work. And then just let them sit in their little sugar throughout the day. And that way you don't have to worry about anything after dinner except putting it all together. So let's get started on strawberry shortcake. All right, so first things first, you're going to need some strawberries. So I sent my husband out to buy strawberries, and he came home with this quart of strawberries, which I have now rinsed, and they're straining in their colander. But I tell you, he bought some beautiful strawberries. I kind of wish we were doing chocolate-covered strawberries with these, but we're having strawberry shortcake because I'm making shortcakes. So what we're going to do with all of these is we're going to cut off their tops. You can do this if you own a strawberry huller, but you don't have to have a strawberry huller, which is good because I don't. We're just going to use a paring knife, cut off their heads, and slice them. Now, if you prefer, you can cut them into quarters or wedges. I myself prefer a nice even slice because it gives a good texture to your dessert. So now I have a cutting knife, I have a cutting board, I have a bowl to put my strawberries in. So we're just going to peel back their little heads, cut off the white part and the green leaves. I compost here, so I'm just going to throw the heads right into the original bin and then slice. And just do this for all of the strawberries in your container. Once upon a time, I did think, I'll make it easy on myself, and I'll use my egg slicer because they give perfectly even slices of about that thickness. I broke my egg slicer. Strawberries are a little sturdier than a hard-boiled egg. And those seeds can catch and break the delicate wires in your egg slicer. So learned from my lesson, just skip that. It's not a good life hack. So I'm just slicing these guys up, tossing them in a bowl. Like I said, you can do these any shape you want. And this is super, super easy. You need to do it at least 4 hours before you plan to have dessert. Because what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of sugar in there and just let them sit in the refrigerator and get good and syrupy. Just a lovely topping. But do it at least 4 hours, at the barest minimum 1 hour. But you can do it, like I said, the night before if you want. The night before is good. I wouldn't do it more than one night in advance. After that, they do start to break down a little bit and get a little slimy, which is not the romantic meal we're going for tonight. So, get these guys up. No, missed and got a leaf. These really are beautiful strawberries. Just sent him back for more just to have some strawberries to eat. Right now, all I have here is a bowl of plain sliced strawberries. To this, we are going to add about 1/3 of a cup of sugar. Honestly, my recipe calls for 1/2 cup, and I find that's just too sweet, so I always cut it back a little to 1/3. One thing you can also do if you want to do something that's a little more interesting is you can add some herbs to this. Mint goes really well, or basil. Get you some fresh herbs, mince them up nicely, and stir them in while we stir in the sugar. So all we're going to do is stir it so that all of these strawberries get a little sugar all over them. Honestly, I'm not certain that there's even enough strawberry here for 1/3 of a cup. So if you want to cut it back to 1/4 of a cup, that's fine. You know, the point here is not to make it a super sweet dessert. We're adding the sugar because it's going to make a nice syrup to go on top of the shortcake. All right, so once we got our sugar stirred in on top of these strawberries, super easy. We're just going to cover the bowl with a little bit of plastic wrap. I found these really nifty gizmos on Amazon to kind of replace some of the disposable plastics in my life. And there we go. Just going to pop this in the fridge. So that's the strawberry part of the strawberry shortcake. Now we have to move on to the shortcake part. Let me preheat my oven here to 450 degrees. All right, so now we move on. We have a bowl. Into this bowl, we are going to put 2 cups of all-purpose flour. We're also going to add 1/3 of a cup of shortening. 2 tablespoons of sugar, 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Now make sure you do baking powder and not baking soda. They're going to give you very different results. And 1 teaspoon of salt. So all of that's going in our bowl, and then you need a pastry blender. If you haven't got a pastry blender, that's okay. You can just use 2 of your basic household knives, just like you would use at dinner. Nothing fancy. You can get a pastry blender pretty cheap at places like Bed Bath & Beyond or Walmart. They come in a couple of different kinds. Mine, as you see, has got some blades. They're not sharp at all. You can also get a wire style. The beauty about the wire style, unlike this one, it's dishwasher safe. So mine I have to wash by hand because of this wooden handle and the bolts that hold it all together. The wire one you can throw in the dishwasher. If I ever replace it, I might go for the wire. But if you don't have a pastry blender, like I said, don't worry about it. Just use a couple of knives. You'll use a cutting motion until everything is blended. So with a pastry blender, if you have one, just go straight down into the mixture in your bowl. So you are not grinding the blender into everything, just straight down cuts. You can change the bowl angle. What your goal here is to cut up all of that shortening into little tiny pieces and get it mixed in so that all the sugar and the flour, the baking soda and the salt are clinging to those little globs of shortening. Because once you go into the oven with your shortbread, those little globs of shortening are going to melt, and that's what's going to make your shortbread really flaky. So just cutting this in. You want to keep doing this until all of your shortening really is in very tiny pieces, probably bigger than sand, but smaller than peas, and pretty uniform. And like I said, we're just doing a straight up and down motion. Now, I got a little shortening going up the side, so we'll just toss that back in the mix. Now, it doesn't take very long to get to this stage. It seems like it should take a really long time, but it really doesn't. Like I said, really now it looks mostly just like flour. It's a little thicker, a little stickier than the flour is itself, but it's no longer a big glob of shortening. To this, need a bigger spatula, we are going to add 3/4 of a cup of milk. Now, one good thing about baking or making pancakes or waffles, shortcakes, anything like this, it's okay if your milk is getting a little bit old. Like if it starts to have that weird smell and you don't want to eat it on your cereal, it's still perfectly safe to bake with. It won't really affect any of what you're doing. Obviously, if you have let your milk become sour cream, your milk is too far gone. Don't bake with that. But just if it smells a little funny, just bake something with it. All right, so we've now got it. It's formed a pretty good ball here of dough, which I'm going to now turn out onto a little mat. I have my rolling pin, my flour. So you see, I do bake a lot. You can get 20 pounds of flour into this container, and I have sometimes. So just gonna sprinkle a little flour on my mat. Spread it out so that everything's covered a little bit. The flour here is primarily just to keep everything from sticking. So turning out the ball of flour, of batter. There we go. All right, so now that it's out, we're gonna just knead this about 24 times. So you wanna make sure that you do not just jab your fingers in or you'll end up with all of your fingers glued together. So it's really good to use the heel of your hand and just, get in there, roll it. You're going to incorporate some of this flour into it, which is going to help it be a little less sticky. So just, fold, smush it back down, fold, smush it back down. We're gonna do this, like I said, about 24 times. I think we're at about 10 now. My flour started to bunch up, so we're turning it to the middle. And then it should start to feel a little different to your hands. It's gonna start to feel not dry on the outside, but it's gonna lose some of that stickiness that it started with. It's gonna start to feel like a cohesive unit. And that's really what you're going for here. All right, so that's about my 24 times. I'm going to set it over here on the side because my mat's getting a little short of flour. I'm just going to sprinkle a hair more flour on it. Also going to use some of this flour, make sure that my rolling pin is liberally covered with flour so that the dough doesn't stick to the pin. Now I'm going to roll this out so it's about a 1/2 inch thick, which on my hand works out to be just slightly bigger than the height of a fingernail. So you can test it on your own hand. If you have biscuit cutters, a lot of those are conveniently 1 inch high or 1/2 inch high, and so you can use that as your measurement. They also do make these fabulous little rubber bands you can put on your rolling pin if you want, that come in an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. I have a set, but honestly, I find it so hard to work with them that it's just so hard to get them on and off for me. I saw in a catalog some that were not like rubber bands. They were more like solid blocks. And so you didn't have to fight with them to get them over your rolling pin, which is good if you own a very standard rolling pin, but not as useful if you have a rolling pin like I do. My husband's grandfather actually hand carved this rolling pin. So it's not standard at all. Now, it's time to cut our shortcakes. Now, you have a couple of choices. Most of the time when you think about shortcake, you think perhaps of a nice round size. This one is ripply edged. You can use that. You can buy, if you want, a set of biscuit cutters. These are from Betty Crocker. They come in about 10 different sizes here, it looks like. 8 sizes. But it's Valentine's Day. So I'm going to change it up. You can cut your shortbread into any shape you want and use it pretty much year-round for any season. If you would like to use stars, go for a star. You want to cut it like a dinosaur? Go for a dinosaur. That works. It's Valentine's Day. I'm going to go for a heart. So this is a 3-inch cutter, which I think is about a good portion for a piece of shortbread, shortcake. We're just going to cut that with our cutter and put it on a cookie sheet. So you're going to put them on your cookie sheet about an inch apart. They're going to grow in height, but they aren't going to grow a lot left to right. And that's why, if you want, you can do all kinds of crazy shapes because it's not going to lose its shape. Now, you should probably get in the neighborhood of 6 or so of these little shortcakes. Some of that's going to depend on really what size cutter you do use. Obviously, the smaller a cutter, the more shortcakes you'll get. And if you don't roll it precisely half an inch, you're going to get more if they're thicker and fewer if they're thicker and more if they are longer. So I got 4 out of the first roll, putting it all back together and rolling it out again. Now I usually end up with one really funny shaped one at the end because it doesn't fit the cutter. And I just squish all the scraps together. Really, it tastes the same, so nobody minds eating the scrap shortcake. I think this might end up being the scrap shortcake. We will see. Now it looks like I can get one more heart out of here. So there we go. I've got half a dozen hearts and one weird little spiral, which I promise is not going to go unloved. All right, so the oven is done preheating. We're going to put these guys in for 20 to 25 minutes. It depends on how your oven cooks. If you know your oven cooks unevenly, I recommend that you flip it halfway through. And I also recommend an apron so you don't get flour all over your tummy. Okay, it's been 25 minutes. It's time for those shortbreads to come out of the oven. All right, like I said, I would have one very funny looking one and a bunch of heart shapes. So these are all done. My oven is off, the timer is off. We're just gonna let these cool. Now, ideally, strawberry shortcakes should be eaten warm, or at least the shortcakes should be warm. So if you make these in advance, you can pop them back in the oven for a couple of minutes right before dessert. But at least get the heavy part of the work done beforehand, because there's enough to worry about with dinner and eating, and you don't want to then get back up and go slave in the kitchen over dessert. These are all going to be all ready for you to go. All we have to do tonight, after dinner, slice them open, pile them with strawberries, and serve them with some whipped cream. Okay, welcome back. I've got my workspace cleaned up. I found an apron, got the flour off of my shirt. Now I'm going to make a little bit of sweetened whipped cream. And again, you can make this in advance, just like you can make the shortcakes and the strawberries. That way you don't have to worry about this after dinner. So we're going to make about 1.5 cups of whipped cream. This is most of the container of heavy whipping cream, but not quite all. So the smallest you can buy is a 1/2 pint of heavy cream. It's heavy whipping cream. We're going to use 3/4 cup, so 3/4 of what's in here. What's left, if you want to put it in your coffee, it goes great. So we're putting in 3/4 cup of heavy cream and 2 tablespoons of sugar. So what I have here is heavy cream and sugar, my hand mixer, and I am going to just put it on medium-high, so about halfway up on my little dial, and I'm just going to mix until it comes to some peaks, and it's going to be a little bit glossy. Right now, as obviously as cream, it is glossy, but we're not there yet, but I just want to show you what we're looking at. It is starting to get very thick. As you can see, it's too drippy. Whipped cream should not be drippy, but this really doesn't take that long to start to come together. So Just gonna give it a little bit more mixing. We are almost there. It's still just a little bit thin, but you can see you're starting to get some of the ripples are staying as you mix. So that is a good sign. So we now have whipped cream. If this is not your kind of thing and you just don't want to spend 3 minutes with a mixer, that's okay. Ready Whip in the can is delicious. And we're just gonna save this for after dinner. I'm gonna cover it up with another little piece of plastic here. Pop this in the fridge too. Hello, welcome back. It's been a few hours since we made dessert, and so now it is time to start working on dinner. So, as I mentioned earlier, the menu tonight is very fancy sounding, but it's actually pretty quick. It's pretty easy. Once I get started, we're just going to go straight through because there is no stopping this train. Tonight's menu is filet mignon with a red wine shallot sauce. And we're going to pair that with some roasted garlic mashed potatoes and some Haricot Verts, which is really just a fancy French way of saying green beans. They're going to be cooked with some shallots too to kind of unify all those flavors. Haricot Verts are actually slightly different from your standard green beans. French green beans are a little skinnier and a little sweeter. And you can get those still at the grocery store, prepackaged and ready to go. If you can't find them, it's okay. We're going to use regular old green beans tonight, and you can do that at home as well. So let's get started with our meat. So I have here 3 pieces of filet. They're not properly filet mignon because they were cut off ends. So the beauty of this recipe, you can scale it. If you want to cook 1 filet just for you, you can do that. It's going to work just as easily. If you want to cook for a family of 6, you can do that too. Just instead of getting individual filet mignons, it's probably going to be easier to get a tenderloin roast. The recipe is going to work pretty much the same. Your cooking time, of course, is going to be a lot longer and a little bit lower for the temperature, because for a roast, you want to cook it lower temperature, longer time to make sure you get that tenderness in the meat. So I have here the ends of a tenderloin roast. We did Chateaubriand for Christmas, which is just a whole roast tenderloin. And when you cut that into steaks, they become filet mignons. So these are my little steaks. We are going to rub a little seasoning on each one. So what I have here in my bowl is some sea salt, and then my sort of secret weapon for all things food that you want to kick up, particularly chocolate, but amazingly really well on red meat too, a little espresso powder. You can get instant espresso powder in the coffee aisle at Publix, and it will do amazing things to some of the things you want to cook. I include it in chocolate cake. I make hot fudge sauce every year. There's a little hint of espresso in there. You don't want to put in enough that it all tastes like coffee, but just a little hint is going to really ratchet up the flavor profile of what you are cooking. So this is salt and espresso, and we are just going to sprinkle it right here on the meat. Like I said, this was the end of a roast, so I also have like this weird little piece that's not quite a steak, but it's going to taste delicious all the same. Flip these guys over. A little more salt and espresso. All right, since I'm all meaty, I'm going to go wash my hands real quick. Now, I'm also going to grate some fresh black pepper onto all of these. As far as quantity, I'm going to say this was probably about a tablespoon of sea salt, probably about a teaspoon of espresso, and then, I don't know, some pepper. I like mine a little bit peppery, so I usually go for a generous layer of black pepper. If you prefer a little lighter pepper, that's certainly your prerogative. I guess I'll keep that for the moment. A little pepper on the other side too. Don't forget to do both sides. All right, So what we're going to do next is we're going to put this into a hot skillet. We're going to sear both sides of it, and then we're going to throw it in the oven to finish it off. While it's cooking in the oven, we'll get started on our sides. So let's work on that. All right, as you can see, we've changed up the angle here so you can see everything that's going on my skillet or on my stovetop. So the first thing you want to get going are your potatoes, because they're going to take probably the longest time of everything on this menu. I've already diced my potatoes. I have them in about a 1-inch dice. You want to make sure you get them as consistent as possible so that they cook evenly. If you have big pieces and small pieces, you're going to end up with really weirdly chunky uncooked pieces in your mashed potatoes, and nobody wants that. Mine are peeled, but if you would like to leave skins in your mashed potatoes, that's perfectly acceptable. It's your choice entirely. If you do like skins in your mashed potatoes, it's probably better to go with something like a red potato or a small white potato so the skin is already soft and tender. You want a fairly new skin. If you get those massive russet potatoes, you're going to get a very tough skin that's not going to mash well. So we prefer skin-free mashed potatoes here. So all of mine are peeled, they're diced, they're in water. I've just turned on the heat so they can come to a boil. As it gets hot, I will also throw in some salt. If you throw in salt before your water's hot, sometimes it can lead to pitting in your pan. So it's best if you can wait until the water gets hot to throw that in. That way it'll dissolve in the water and not spend time hanging out with your pan. Also here I have a large skillet. There's about 2 tablespoons of olive oil in it. This is where we're going to brown the meat. So it is currently medium and then just a hair. My stovetop is really super hot if you go up to hot. And when we want it hot, we don't want it burn the place down hot. So on my scale of 10, mine's at about a 6 right now. You know your oven. What you want is to get a good medium-high heat on your oven. So we are waiting on this oil to come to temperature. You want to get it so it's really, really hot. You don't want it to smoke, but you want it to be just short of that point. Because when we put the meat in, it's going to immediately sear the outside if it's hot enough, and the oil won't have time to soak in and make your meat greasy. Whereas if you put meat into the cold oil, it will make your meat more greasy. So you can start to see around the edges at the bottom, it's starting to kind of make thin little legs. It means we're getting pretty close. There are ripples along the edge, right at the edge of the pan. So if you start to see smoke, especially if you're using olive oil, I hate to tell you, but you probably want to throw it away and start over again. The oil, not the whole skillet. Olive oil can impart a very bitter taste if you let it burn. So don't use extra virgin olive oil if you're going to let it get super, super hot, or you will get that bitter taste. So, all right, looks like we are getting hot enough. So we are going to put the meat in. Don't mess with it. Let it form its super hard crust on the outside. We're going to let it sear for about 4 minutes per side. All right, now the meat is doing its thing. I'm going to put the handle so it's out of the way. Nobody flips anything over. We're going to get started on the green beans. So, like I said, this is a rapid fire. We're doing all the things all at once kind of menu. So we're going to start with the green beans. And that means that what I need is my pan. If you have another large skillet, something that you can fit a lid on is ideal. So, got my skillet here. And in here, I am going to put a little more olive oil. Again, about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Now, these are my green beans. They do come already bagged at Publix. You don't have to buy them loose. You can. So I've rinsed them. I've also snapped all the stem ends off. And once the oil has come up to temperature, we will get started. All right, so I've also preheated my oven to 400 degrees. Once the meat has seared on both sides, I'm going to stick it in the oven to finish cooking. So go ahead and make sure that your oven is already preheating. I don't know how long yours takes. If yours takes a good long time, you probably needed to have already started it. If yours is quick, make sure you get it started now. So 400 degrees in the oven, medium-high heat on the stovetop. The potatoes are at high. The oil for the green beans is also at medium. Make sure for the meat that your skillet has a handle that is oven safe, because like I said, we're going to throw the whole thing right into the oven. So if you have, say, a Tefal skillet with Teflon and a plastic handle, that's probably going to melt when you throw it in the oven. Make sure that you get a skillet that has an oven safe handle. In my case, they're stainless steel, so they're going to be fine in the oven. But what they will do is they're going to get super, super hot. So make sure that you have a good hot mitt. You can get these little guys. You've probably seen them at places that sell fajitas. They put them on those cast iron fajita pans. And they do a good job of protecting your hands. So have it ready for when it comes out of the oven. Think about it early. I have burned my hand really badly on the skillet handle. Don't do that. All right, so these guys have now been searing for about 4 minutes. Time to flip them over. See, you got a real nice crust on that side. Now, keep an eye on your oil. If you need more, this is a good time to add some butter rather than more olive oil. Butter is going to impart some more flavor, and it's going to melt differently than your olive oil, so you don't need to worry about heating it up. There you go. You can see how quickly it melts in and joins the party. If you like to watch cooking shows, a lot of times you'll see them add in some herbs at this point. If you like a little herbiness to your steak, you can throw in some fresh rosemary. All of it will taste pretty darn good. All right. So the skillet for my beans is hot. So what I'm going to add to this is 2 shallots. They're thinly sliced. I'm just going to throw them right in the hot oil. Now, a shallot is a relative of onions and garlic, and flavor-wise, it's somewhere in between the two. You can usually buy them in 2 packs at Publix, 3 if they are pretty small. This particular batch, they're absolutely enormous. So they do range in size. This one is 2 pretty good sized shallots. If all you can find are the small ones, go ahead and do 3. That's a shallot, and I'm going to say that's a pretty large shallot. So the shallots here in their olive oil, they are going to cook for 8 minutes. So you want them to get tender. You don't want them to burn, so keep a good eye on them. Oh, my potatoes have come up, so we don't want them to overboil and spill potato starch everywhere. If you put the lid on your potatoes, they will come to a boil faster, but you don't need to keep the lid on because this is going to encourage them to boil over. As you are planning your meal, think about the things that can keep if you get stuck doing something else. Potatoes are usually pretty good sitting and waiting for you. Meat is pretty good sitting and waiting for you. Your vegetables are never really good sitting and waiting for you. My shallots are starting to get a little too brown, so I'm turning down the heat. Like I said, they want to be on medium. All right, so the meat's been searing on this side. We're going on 4 minutes. I have here in my pocket the meat thermometer. And I'm going to put it into the thickest part of my steak. Don't make sure you don't go all the way through. And currently, my steak thinks it is at 86 degrees. Up, just jumped up to 98. And now I'm going to put the whole thing right in the oven. Turn off that burner. Remember, this is hot, so don't go putting anything else on it. All right, so probably your meat's only going to take 5 to 8 minutes depending on how much you like it cooked. What we're really going to be looking for here is temperature rather than time. If you want it to be rare, you probably want to take it out at about 140 degrees. If you like it medium well, you want to take it out at 155 to 160 degrees. So this is why the meat thermometer is important, because that is going to be your best judge of how done it is rather than just how long it's been sitting in the oven. We've got about 4 minutes more to go. We are going for really cooked for these shallots. As long as you don't burn them, you can get them really cooked, and the more they cook, the sweeter they're going to get. That's true for almost everything in the onion family. Garlic, onions, if you can cook them at a nice temperature without burning them, they're going to get to be very sweet, even if you don't start with sweet onions. Oh, and just like that, our meat is already at 158 degrees. I like my meat a little more cooked. If you like yours rare, yours should have already come out. I'm going for medium well for mine, so I'm looking for 160 there, which it says I am at. That is how fast this was. So I need a hot mitt. Please use a hot mitt. This handle is going to be super hot now in a 400-degree oven. Also hot is going to be your meat thermometer and its little cord. Because I have burned myself badly, I am just going to automatically put this little guy right on here as a reminder not to hurt myself. Alright, so we are now going to take the meat out of the skillet, and we are going to set it on a cutting board to warm up, or to rest, not to warm up. It's not going to get any warmer on a cutting board. And I have a piece of foil here. So you want to loosely wrap it in some foil to keep all the heat in. Whenever you roast meat, it is very important to give it some time to rest. So resting is going to allow its juices to kind of settle back into their natural channels and really keep it from leaking everywhere when you cut open, and it's going to keep your meat very tender and moist. All right, so give these guys a stir. 2 minutes more on the shallots. Now for your potatoes, the way you're going to be able to tell that they are done is when you can smash them without putting a whole lot of pressure against the side of the pan with the back of a wooden spoon, or in my case, I have a silicone spatula. There's still a lot of resistance, so I'm going to give them another minute to cook. All right, so the shallots are pretty tender. They're starting to get really brown, and it is time to add. So, like I said, this is just under a pound of beans. So we're going to add the beans right to the skillet. We're adding half of a teaspoon of salt and a quarter of a teaspoon of fresh ground pepper. We're adding half of a cup of water. Now the lid goes on the pan, and they're going to cook for another 8 minutes. I forgot to say there's also a pinch of sugar. So it's half a teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of pepper, a pinch of sugar, and half of a cup of water. And now we're going to bring them up to a boil and let them cook for 8 minutes. Once they do come up to a boil, we'll lower the temperature to low and just let them simmer. And as maybe you can hear, it doesn't take very long to bring them up to a boil. So we're going to just lower that temperature. All right, how are these potatoes doing? They should be almost ready. Probably cut them a little bigger than I would normally. And of course, the bigger your potato pieces, the longer they're going to take. If you do a 1/2 inch dice, you're going to get pretty quick potatoes. All right, throw in my salt to boiling water. So one thing I did earlier this afternoon was I went ahead and I roasted my garlic for the roasted garlic mashed potatoes. Roasting garlic is a very easy thing, but it does take some time. So you want to take your whole bulb of garlic, cut off the rooty end. Then you're going to rub the whole thing in olive oil, wrap it in foil, and put it into a 425-degree oven for about ½ an hour. That should give it time to get all tender and gooey. It's going to get to be almost a spreading consistency. That is, in fact, a really nice little appetizer you can do. You can get some little crostini crackers, roast your garlic, and then just put it on as a spread. And it is super sweet for garlic and very delicious. And it definitely adds a punch to your mashed potatoes. It's not at all a hard thing to do. You just have to remember to do it in advance because you do want to give it a chance to get out of the oven and out of the way before you start cooking everything else. Just checking my recipes, make sure that I have everything in order for when I'm ready to go. All right, you'll notice I have not done anything yet with this skillet. Don't wash it, don't throw it away, don't clean it out, because we are going to use these delicious meaty bits that are here in the bottom, and that's going to be a big part of our sauce for the meat too. So just don't touch the handle. All right, the potatoes look like they are good, so I'm going to go ahead and turn them off. I'm going to move them off of a hot burner. Like I said, potatoes can be pretty forgiving, so they're probably going to be the last thing we actually make, or pretty close to the last, but I don't want them to overboil because then they turn into glue on that. All right, so let's get started on the sauce. Like I said, you've got some drippings in here. There's still a little butter and olive oil. If it's not got a lot of liquid in it, add a little more olive oil at this point. So we are now going to turn the burner back on to medium heat. Don't take off your hot mitt. So what we're going to add to this pan are all the ingredients to go into our sauce. The important thing when planning your menu is to make sure that all the flavors kind of go together. So we have green beans with a caramelized shallot going on here. We're going to have garlic mashed potatoes, and then the sauce that's going with the meat has more shallots. So that's going to kind of unify the flavor, but all of it is roasted or caramelized, cooked pretty much within 1 inch of its life. So they're all going to be very sweet rather than the savory you expect from onions and garlic. All right, we're going to just let that heat up a little bit more so we can get a good sizzle on the shallots. All right, I'm feeling some pretty good heat on the skillet. I'm going to throw in the shallots. So this is 3 tablespoons of minced shallots. Typically that's going to be 2 or 3 of your fair-sized shallots. The one I minced was actually even bigger than this guy, and it was about 5 tablespoons of minced all by itself. So focus on the tablespoons, not the actual shallot. All right, so we got the shallots in here on medium heat. We are going to cook the shallots until they are soft. It shouldn't take but a few minutes because they are a very small mince. All right, and while they are cooking, we're going to take the lid off of the green beans and turn up the temperature to high. Now, what we're going to do with the green beans is we are going to reduce almost all of the liquid that's in here. Because remember, we put in that ½ cup of water, so we want to cook that away. And we're going to do that by turning the temperature up to high. It's probably going to take about 5 to 6 minutes. All right, you can see, maybe you can see, some of those brown bits are coming up with the onions. Don't worry about those. They're all going to come up once we start adding in the rest of the ingredients. Okay, now's a good time to go ahead and drain off all the water on your potatoes. All right, the shallots are pretty soft, so we are now going to add, I have 1 teaspoon of stone ground mustard. You can use Dijon if you like that flavor and have it. I did not. I have stone ground, so that's what I have. Then there's also half of a teaspoon of sugar in here with the mustard. This is 1 cup of red wine. Make sure you use a red wine that you would actually want to drink. If you use a terrible red wine, it's going to taste terrible when you cook. Now, with the red wine here, you should be able to scrape up all of the rest of the stuck-on bits on the bottom of this pan. And as it heats up, it's going to finish dissolving that mustard for you. Alright, so we are just going to now cook this until it starts to look like a sauce. So you want to reduce it by about half. And that's going to take a few minutes. Do keep your eye on it, so it doesn't boil to nothing. Green beans are getting pretty soft. We've got almost all the liquid cooked out of it. I'm going to get rid of the rest. Alright, so our mashed potatoes. We are going to add to these potatoes about 2 tablespoons of butter. We are going to add that roasted garlic. Once you have roasted it and let it cool, you should be able to just pretty much squirt the insides of the cloves right out of their shells. And if you remember, we had just a little bit of heavy cream left over from making the whipped cream for the strawberry shortcake, so go ahead and polish it off. Just throw what's left right into your mashed potatoes. And then just a little splash of milk. You don't want to go too much on the milk. Oh. Alright, so my mother always whipped her potatoes. I have never successfully whipped a potato and gotten anything but glue, so I am a strict potato masher. Just like with the pastry blender, you want to make sure you do straight up and down motions with your mashed potato masher. If you use it to grind your potatoes into the pan, what you're going to do is you're just going to break it down into its component parts, and you are going to make it quite gluey. So whereas if you use a masher and you go straight down, you'll just break it into smaller pieces, which is better. Looks like I put in too much milk. The good news is I am on my hot burner, so some of that is going to cook away. I once saw an episode of MasterChef where the cook made her potatoes too wet and decided just to throw in some raw flour to thicken it up. It does not make for good potatoes. If you get potatoes that are just too thin, you can just cook off some of that liquid on the stove, which is what I'm going to do because mine are much too thin. Alright. Give the shallot sauce a stir. Give potatoes a good stir. Alright, so I think that the green beans are done. There's no more water in the bottom of the pan. The shallots, the recipe calls for them to be jammy. So I'm going to say they actually do look almost like little shallot jelly. And the beans are very tender. So I'm going to take them off of the high heat. Now I do have a warming zone on my oven, so I'm going to be able to keep them hot. You can also put the lid back on vented so the steam can get out. Alright, so it looks like my sauce has reduced. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some butter to the sauce. So you want to add about 2 tablespoons of butter to this one. I'm going to go ahead and slice up the steak. And now, well, you can serve it sliced, you can serve it whole, whatever makes you happy as far as a presentation. All right. Some green beans on here. Sauce. And that's it. We have a filet mignon with a red wine shallot sauce, haricot verts with caramelized shallots, and some roasted garlic mashed potatoes. And I bet you it's delicious. Thanks for watching. All right, so we've had dinner. I have to tell you, it was in fact absolutely delicious. So both my husband and I enjoyed the filet, the green beans, the haricot verts, and of course the garlic roasted mashed potatoes. So it's time for dessert. So here we have our shortcake. If you are making this for a loved one, pick out the nicest looking one for them. So we are going to cut the shortcake in half. If it's still hot, I recommend you do a little butter on it, a little softened butter just to melt in and get extra good. Then, time to get out our strawberries. We're going to layer up some strawberries, do it on the cut half. Maybe some falling over artistically. Do it how you think looks good. There's no rules here. This is about how you want to serve dessert. All right. So now I think you should just perch the top half just a little bit. And of course, we need some of our fresh whipped cream. Like I said, if you don't feel like making fresh, the store-bought stuff is pretty good. Though you'll never get as good as fresh. And if you make fresh, you can also make some flavors. Like you could have added a little bit of mint extract in here, balance it out with the strawberries. That would have been pretty darn tasty. Mine is just plain, so plain it is. A little sour cream, a little whipped cream to go with the shortcake and the strawberries. There you have it, a little strawberry shortcake to finish off our romantic Valentine's evening. So I hope that you've had a good time with us tonight, and that you have a chance to make this and enjoy it just as much as we did. Take care.